Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at noon, the South Korean foreign minister tells his US counterpart that a lack of admitting historic wrongdoings hampers stability and cooperation in Northeast Asia, where tensions continue to run high. In a development further straining ties in Northeast Asia, Japan's ruling party sets the revision of the country's pacifist constitution and more visits to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine as its main goals for the new year. Plus, the first batch of chemical arms materials has been transported out of Syria for destruction as part of the UN-backed deal to eliminate the country's chemical arsenal. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Korea has expressed to the US that historical issues stand in the way of improved ties in Northeast Asia. Comments seemingly directed towards Japan following Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent visit to a war shrine that honors several Class A war criminals.
Seoul and Washington also agreed to increased efforts to ease tensions in the region and reiterated their united front against North Korea's nuclear threats. Our Yurian reports.
Korea has delivered its message to the United States that history disputes remain a stumbling block to improving relations in Northeast Asia. Following an hour-long meeting with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in Washington Tuesday, Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se said the current situation in the region calls for sincere actions, adding that the two agreed on the need to alleviate tensions.
Secretary Kerry and I also recognize the growing uncertainty pervading Northeast Asia in recent times. In particular, I pointed out that historical issues stand in the way of reconciliation and cooperation in this region.
While neither Yoon nor Kerry directly mentioned Japan by name, the comments are almost certainly aimed at Tokyo, as they come just weeks after Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to the Yasukuni Shrine escalated tensions with Korea and China. The shrine honors Japan's war dead, including several Class A war criminals. The two officials also agreed to urge Pyongyang to get rid of its nuclear program.
We call on North Korea to denuclearize. We will not accept North Korea as a nuclear state, nor as a nuclear-armed state, and nor will the international community abide by that.
Emphasizing the two countries stand united, Kerry added the United States is fully committed to the defense of South Korea and said it will continue to modernize its military capabilities in preparation against any threat. Yurian, Arirang News.
A move that is sure to further escalate tensions in Northeast Asia. Japan's ruling party has set constitutional reform and continued visits to the Yasukuni Shrine as key goals for the coming year, or for this year. Jinju has the details.
Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party has unveiled its key goals for the coming year: reform the constitution and continue with visits to the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine. During a general meeting on Tuesday, the party decided to, quote, make practical constitutional reforms without damaging the original purpose of the country's pacifist constitution. The party also vowed not to wage war and agreed to uphold the tradition of visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, which honors 2.5 million Japanese war dead, including 14 Class A war criminals. With regard to education, the party promised to ensure that students will not be taught a pessimistic concept of history by putting in place measures for making and adopting textbooks. Those plans, however, are expected to face a strong backlash from Korea and China. The biggest concern being brought up in both countries is that Japan is trying to become a country that is allowed to engage in war by amending its pacifist constitution. The current constitution, adopted after the nation's defeat in World War II, bans the country from using military force.
Should the Japanese leader avoid facing Japan's history of militaristic invasion and not take sincere steps toward reflecting on its past wrongdoing, the country will be led down a wrongful and dangerous path.
The decision to continue visits to the war shrine is also expected to draw criticism not only from Seoul and Beijing, but many countries around the world, just as it did after Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's latest visit there. In line with its goals for the coming year, the Abe administration has also officially launched a secretariat of the National Security Council that will serve as the control tower for the government's security policies. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
Korea and the U.S. have reportedly agreed to adopt a document dealing with nuclear exports and management of spent nuclear fuel. The document, separate from the two sides' civilian nuclear energy accord to be revised by March of 2016, will ease the process for Korea to obtain nuclear power plant parts from the U.S. to be exported elsewhere and encourage cooperation on spent fuel reprocessing technologies. Seoul has been pushing Washington to allow it to enrich its own uranium and reprocess spent nuclear fuel to meet its growing energy needs, but the U.S. remains reluctant to agree due to proliferation concerns. After wrapping up their 9th round of negotiations in Korea's central city of Daejeon Wednesday, the two sides will resume talks in April.
President Park Geun-hye has urged lawmakers and members of the ruling Saenuri Party to help the government realize her 3-year economic innovation plan. Speaking at a dinner party held Tuesday evening at the presidential office for ruling party members, the president rallied support for her goal of putting the country on the path to a per capita income of $40,000 before her term ends. To achieve the goal, the president pledged to ease regulations in areas that can spur job creation. Saying the division of the two Koreas stands in the way of the nation's full potential, the president also urged the ruling party to work towards reunification. The party leadership vowed to work closely with the government and bring normalcy to Parliament, which has been deadlocked for much of last year. Korea's finance ministry says the domestic economic recovery is gathering momentum, despite lingering global economic uncertainties, which are casting a cloud over what would otherwise represent an optimistic outlook. In its monthly Green Book report released Wednesday, the ministry said major economic indicators like production and investment improved last October and November compared to the third quarter of last year. It also cited stabilizing prices and expanding employment. However, the report also pointed to the weak Japanese yen and the US Federal Reserve's bond buying stimulus tapering as major uncertainties that could potentially hurt the country's growth rate in the long run. Now, the Korean government has been laying out some seriously ambitious economic plans which are primarily focused on boosting incomes and creating lots of new jobs. Hwang Jie takes a look at what's ahead in 2014.
During a meeting with economic policymakers on Tuesday, Korea's Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok reiterated the government's 3-year economic innovation plan. Under the plan, the country's growth potential is expected to grow to around 4%, and the annual per capita income is forecast to exceed $30,000, with sights on reaching 40,000. The government also aims to achieve a 70% employment rate.
We will come up with a roadmap for the 3-year economic innovation plan by the end of February.
Although experts say the goals that make up the plan are not easily attainable, they add that it's not impossible. But in order to get there, they point to the importance of boosting domestic demand.
Export industries that local companies mainly concentrate on have a limited impact on the domestic economy, since they create fewer than expected jobs. It's now important to boost the domestic demand, in particular by strengthening the nation's service sector.
Regarding the growth prospects for this year, economists cite a number of major risks stemming from the global economy that could affect the domestic economy. That includes the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision last month to taper its $85 billion per month bond-buying stimulus measures, the slowing Chinese economy, and Abenomics in Japan, which is pushing the Japanese yen lower while eroding the price competitiveness of Korean exporters.
The current trend of the weakening Japanese yen will hurt Korea's exporters and could eventually lead to a reduction in Korea's overall growth rate by 0.1 percentage points per year.
In terms of uncertainties at home, the snowballing household debt problem and the sluggish real estate market are cited as major variables that could cut the nation's growth rate. Experts say, however, that the recovery we're seeing in advanced nations is still a good sign for the Korean economy. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Korea saw a boom in the medical tourism industry last year, with the country's health tourism surplus topping the $100 million mark for the first time. The Bank of Korea says that the country's income from medical tourism was $187 million in the first 11 months of last year, growing more than 35% from the same period in 2012. During the same period, however, Koreans' overseas spending on medical tourism decreased by more than 11%. Korea saw its first surplus in the medical tourism industry in 2011. New data from Korea Central Bank shows that nationwide household debt grew at a faster clip in 2013. As Korean households plunge further and further into debt, concerns are rising that the growing financial burden may hurt domestic demand. Our Polly has more.
The Bank of Korea released data on Tuesday showing that the country's household debt reached an all-time high last year. Outstanding household lending by local banks and non-bank financial institutions totaled a record $639.5 billion as of the end of November. The increase of $4.7 billion from October marks the largest monthly gain in 5 months since a nearly $6.2 billion on-month advance in June. The central bank says the growth in mortgage loans expanded due in part to an increase in housing transactions during the cited period. The latest tally shows that Korean households are feeling the burden of massive debt. The nation's household credit, which includes bank loans and purchases on credit, hit a fresh high of over $931 billion as of the end of September. At this current pace, that figure is expected to surpass about $940 billion by November. And compared to 2004, the nation's household debt level has more than doubled. Other statistics have shown that Korean households have also lost their spending power. Household debt against disposable income rose to 136% last year, the highest ratio in a decade. The new data comes ahead as BOK policymakers are scheduled to hold a rate-setting session for January on Thursday. Analysts widely expect the central bank to freeze the key interest rate at 2.5% for the 8th consecutive month. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
Korean tech giants Samsung and LG have both rolled out their lineups of curved ultra-high-definition TVs, but they're already facing competition from Japanese and Chinese manufacturers. At the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas on Tuesday, Sony and other Japanese companies showcased their new UHD TV lineups. Chinese budget TV maker TCL unveiled a line of UHD TVs that are less than half the price of Samsung and LG's models, which are priced between $30,000 and $70,000. Market analysts expect around 12 million UHD TVs to be sold this year.
For your fill of Korean and international news, join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
In a move seen as an important step towards dismantling Syria's chemical weapons stockpile, the first batch of chemical weapons materials was loaded onto a ship on Tuesday and taken out of the country. The operation is the first step in a UN-led deal to rid the country of its deadly chemical arsenal. Son Jung-in has the details.
Raw materials for poison gas were loaded Tuesday onto a Danish cargo ship at Syria's port of Latakia in what is being seen as a major milestone in a plan to rid the country of its chemical arms by the middle of this year. The UN and the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog responsible for ensuring the weapons destruction said the Danish ship is on course for a meeting with the U.S. Navy vessel that will then take the cargo out to international waters where it will be destroyed. The chemicals were scheduled to be removed from Syria by December 31st, but a worsening domestic conflict, bad weather, and other factors delayed the operation by a week. Syria agreed to abandon its chemical weapons by June of this year under a deal brokered by the U.S. and Russia. The deal came about in response to a chemical weapons attack on a Damascus suburb last August that left at least 1,400 civilians dead. Since then, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's forces have been under international pressure over allegations that he used sarin nerve gas in the attack. The weapons removal operation is taking place against the backdrop of a widening civil war and escalating infight between rebel factions. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the war, now in its third year, has killed more than 130,000 people. 손정인, Arirang News.
Russia has put its security forces in Sochi on combat alert with exactly 1 month before the start of the Winter Olympics. 2 recent suicide bomb attacks in the nearby city of Volgograd has put the country on edge, and Russian President Vladimir Putin wants to ensure the Games run without incident. The clearest threat comes from Islamist groups, particularly Chechen rebel leader Doku Umarov, who has publicly called on militants to use maximum force to prevent the Games going ahead. As part of the extremely tight security, cars without local license plates or special permits are not allowed to enter the city or go near Olympic facilities, and visitors must register with local authorities within 3 days or they risk being thrown out. More than 30,000 police and soldiers are also on the ground to help the other 7,000 security personnel secure the area. Former NBA star Dennis Rodman has never shied away from controversy, but he took things to a new level, even for him, on Tuesday, having a complete meltdown on CNN when asked about a missionary detained in North Korea. When the CNN anchor asked Rodman whether he would use his visit to North Korea to raise the case of Kenneth Bae, a Korean-American tour guide who's been imprisoned in North Korea for over a year on the vague charges of hostile acts against the state, Rodman erupted into a foul-mouthed rant in which he said Bae deserved to be serving time. He also tried to defend his heavily criticised basketball diplomacy tour. Rodman is currently in Pyongyang for an exhibition game against the North Korean national team, which will take place on this Wednesday in what they are saying is a birthday present for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
In the U.S., the worst cold spell in almost 2 decades is gripping much of the nation. Record-shattering low temperatures have grounded flights and halted trains, and at least 20 deaths have been blamed on the weather since last week. Our Connie Lee has more.
A blast of Arctic air has settled over much of the eastern United States. In upstate New York, the cold is visible in the frozen roads and buildings covered in snow. Washington, D.C. is also suffering from the abnormally low temperatures.
It's not good. This is like the coldest we've had it in years, and it's sad.
On Tuesday, the National Weather Service said that temperatures from the Midwest to the Southeast were expected to be 14 to 19 degrees lower than average for this time of year. Central Park in New York hit a record low of minus 16 degrees Celsius, and usually mild Atlanta, Georgia in the south reported its coldest temperature in 44 years at minus 14 degrees Celsius.
We're not used to it at all, so we're not prepared.
The deep freeze grounded nearly 2,000 U.S. flights on Tuesday and delayed more than 1,000 others, according to one airline activity website. And 3 Amtrak trains that were heading into Chicago came to a halt, leaving more than 500 passengers stranded overnight.
When we passed Princeton, he said we coming to a little delay. That delay lasted 12 and a half hours. It wasn't no delay.
Since last week, at least 20 weather-related deaths have been attributed to the cold. And outside of the U.S., Western Europe has also been battling some of its worst storms in 2 decades. Torrential rains and high winds have caused massive flooding and power outages this week. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
The smog-filled skies above China are a visible reminder of the heavy price the nation is paying for its rapid economic development. A recently released medical report suggests as many as 500,000 people are dying each year in China due to air pollution. Our Connie Kim has the details.
The smog-cloaked skylines of Chinese cities aren't just an eyesore, they're affecting the health of Chinese citizens. A report published in the Lancet Medical Journal says that air pollution in China is responsible for between 350,000 to 500,000 premature deaths every year. Former Chinese Health Minister Chen Zhu and the co-authors of the report used information from the World Bank and the World Health Organization that included real-time air monitoring data across cities. Recognizing the growing problem, the Chinese government has invested $280 billion to crack down on major polluters. The measures are expected to cut down premature deaths in the nation by up to 200,000 annually. But there is no easy fix. While industrial and coal plants, along with vehicles, are known to be the major polluters, Chen, the author of the study, said the multiple sources of pollution in China make it difficult to control. The smog belt in China had been mainly confined to the capital city of Beijing, but it has rapidly expanded to other cities like Shanghai and Nanjing. On Wednesday, the Chinese government issued its highest level smog warning in the northern and central regions and advised people to avoid outdoor activities. It's a growing problem that doesn't just affect China. The Korean government issued fine dust warnings for the first time ever in December after it blew over across the West Sea, and additional warnings have come in recent weeks. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
I don't know about you, Yusan, but that makes me want to jump in my car and drive very fast. But let's get a check on the weather now with weathercaster Lee Ji-yeon, who is standing by in a field, it seems, at our weather center. Hello there, Ji-yeon.
Good afternoon, Mark and Yusan. I don't know if it's only me, but the dry air and toxic smoke we've been having is making my throat hurt really bad.
Oh, me too. Do you have any good suggestions for how we can ease the discomfort?
Well, there are some traditional Korean teas that are good for the throat. Lemon tea and ginger tea help to ease the symptoms of a sore throat, and a cup of pear tea helps to combat fever and stop coughing. So try those the next time you need something for your throat. Well, for today's forecast, the temperatures should be 2 to 6 degrees lower than yesterday, so be sure to bundle up tight before heading out. And much of the country has been receiving snow and sleet mixed with rain, especially regions down south, and parts of Gyeongsang-do and Jeollado can expect up to 5 centimeters of snow, and Jeju-do should see 10 to 30 millimeters of rainfall. But all of the precipitation should start to taper off this afternoon. But don't get too comfortable because Korea is in for a big freeze. The temperatures will plunge tonight, and tomorrow morning we'll wake up to -9 here in Seoul metro area. And Friday is expected to be the coldest day of the season. So please keep that in mind, and here are the readings for today. The afternoon high in Seoul, Daegu and Gwangju will all peak at 4, and Busan should see a high of 6 in the afternoon. Now for other regions, it looks like Jeju will get up to 10. Daejeon and Dokdo will get up to 3 and 5 respectively, and the top temperature on Kumgangsan Mountain will be at -5. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. That's all for me today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And back to Mark and Yusan in the studio.
Thank you very much for the weather, Jian. And that does it for this Wednesday edition of Newsline at Noon.
Join us again tomorrow at the same time here in Seoul.